Welcome to the Know Why podcast. Today we're talking with Dr. Tanita Maddox about the question, how can I feel safe when the world is so unstable? Dr. Maddox, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So you are with Young Life. You're a second generation Young Life kid and leader, and now the Associate Regional Director for Young Life's Mountain West region. Dr. Maddox is also married and has 2 sons and a doctorate of ministry that she focused her doctoral thesis on sharing the gospel with Gen Z. So I would love to know more about that. Tell us about your background a little bit and what led you to study this generation.
I have had the honor of being a Young Life leader since 1998. I'm into my 25th year on Young Life staff, which means you see a lot of adolescents come through the doorways. And about 8 years ago, I felt a significant shift that something had happened. I was seeing panic attacks at our events. I was talking to a lot of parents about the anxiety their kids had. Even something simple like noticing that the high school students that trying to get them together, especially our girls, they'd say, "Oh, I don't want to get with everyone. I just want to hang out with you one-on-one." I started to see some pretty open hostility to the Bible and to those who believed in the Bible, not just apathy, just open hostility. And I have to tell you, my first response was, "Oh my goodness, it's me. I'm getting too old. I'm no longer relevant." And it was about that time that I had just started working on my doctoral work. I had read a couple books, took a class, and it's not like that was intentional. It's just like someone said, you should read this book. And I happened to be taking a class called Preaching Christ in a Post-Everything World. Mm-hmm. And when I started to put the nuts and bolts together, I went, oh my goodness, it's not me. Their new generation showed up and we had no idea who they were, what they were like. And so I was just applying the old things I've always done to a new group of folks. And I thought, it's time to understand kids. I want to know who our young people are now.
Yeah. Wow. And I love that because I think that young adults can probably identify with this who are listening. It's like everybody says they're this way, they're putting all these labels, and it's probably feels like I'm technically a millennial. I'm like kind of barely a millennial, but I know it can feel like nobody actually understands what my generation is going through. And one of the questions that you've talked about, I've read your articles and seen some of your talks online, but there's this big question with the generation right now is, am I safe? So can you talk us through that and what areas of life does that apply to when people ask that question?
That's the $1 million question, Liberty. Where when we say, I want to be a safe person, I want to be in a safe place. Is that room safe? Is that club safe? Whatever it is, it's really hard to get concrete words around it because the definition of safe has been expanded so far. So we're not just talking about physical safety. I'm a Gen Xer, so really it was it was so limited to don't talk to strangers and don't ride in the back of a pickup truck. Those were kind of our limitations on that of be safe.
And you're probably doing it anyway, right?
Right. And so it's moved on beyond physical safety, right, to emotional safety, psychological safety, and then even further to safety from discomfort, safety from disagreement, safety from risk, safety from failure. It's so broad. It encompasses so many things. And one of the reasons it's hard to get our brain around it is because it's also personalized. So every person has a personalized definition of what it means to feel safe, what they require to feel safe. And then you have, all these people in the world with all those definitions that falls under the massive umbrella of it could mean anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow.
Do you relate with that at all, Liberty?
Yeah, I definitely. And I think you're right. It is so personalized. And that's interesting too, because I know that I think a lot of people today are more sensitive to another person's experience. So, it can be hard to figure out what do you mean when you say you want to be safe. But at the same time, I think you have more of an acknowledgement that everybody's experience is kind of different. But yeah, it makes it more complex when we're trying to understand that. But when the world feels so unsafe right now. I mean, you've got global conflict, you've got natural disasters, and political unrest in a lot of ways. So, is it even possible to feel safe? And if they say, I do feel safe, or I'm at peace, you know, are they just ignoring the issues and not really paying attention?
Well, it's interesting because as humans, we were never designed to know everything that was going on in the world all at once. Like that's really God's job. And somehow we took it on.
Yeah.
And it's okay to admit that we're not designed to handle all of these things that are happening at the exact same time. And that's the first step, right? Is we have to admit that I'm not designed to hold all of this. But the second piece is really understanding, where does my definition of safe come from, right? So when we're having these conversations, what can be difficult is I take my definition of safety and then I apply it to everything else as a filter of defining if that's safe or not, including God. So if I decide what safe is, then I go to God. I run him through my criteria, my filter, and I decide if God is safe or not. And really, we were designed to have the other way around, for God to define what safety is, to redefine that for that, and then navigate the world under that definition of safety. And so is it possible to feel safe in the world the way it is? I do think it is, when we're working with a definition of safety that we are designed to work under, when we're defining our safety in our own terms and our own individualistic view and ideals and cultural context and socioeconomic context and all the contexts that apply to us. We're not working on the same playing field, and it can be much more difficult to navigate with that kind of safety underlying the surface.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think there is a lot of confusion about what we were designed for or how we were designed today. I know this is probably something that you've written about, but identity is another big question that people have. So what's God's definition of safe?
You know, I don't think I can answer on behalf of God, but I can look into the Bible, because once you start looking at scripture, you're like, hold on a second. There's a lot of crazy things happening to people who are following God. How could it be possibly safe to be with them? One of my favorite places to turn is when Jesus invites Peter to get out of a boat in the middle of the sea during a storm to walk on the water with him. And the second question often people are asking is, why would God let these kinds of things happen in the world? That is God unsafe because he allows this kind of turmoil in the world? And again, I can't answer on why God allows things, but the reality is these things are happening. And so the storm is around Peter and the disciples in the boat. Like, the storm doesn't go away. The storm is there. And the option is, do I want to be in the boat and fend for myself, or do I want to walk on the water where Jesus will catch me? Now, any logical human being, I think, would look and say, if you're in a storm on the sea, a boat is the safest place to be. But in this, it throws everything upside down. And it turns out the safest place to be is wherever Jesus is. And Jesus happens to be on the water and invites Peter to come out on the water with him. So over and over and over, I think what we see in scripture is that the God with us, Emmanuel, both in person of Christ, and we see how God interacts with his people in the Old Testament, that his withness, there's a safety about that his way may not make sense. It may not fit my definition of safe, but there's a safety in the mystery of God beyond that we get to experience in the middle of the turmoil, because he invites us to be with him in it.
Yeah. Wow, I love how you explained that. Just, it's not the way that we understand it, but we have to release like our earthly understanding or concepts of what safe looks like. And it might be the total opposite, but being where Jesus is. That's so good. So let's kind of take the next step practically. If someone is listening and they say, I love that, I want to do that, or I do believe in God. I believe in Jesus, and I know in my head that I can trust him. but I still feel so much anxiety. And I know that there's so many people right now who do struggle with anxiety, whether that's just their own life or the state of the world. So what are any practical tips you might have for us to be able to deal with that?
Yeah. So I want to start by saying that I am not a licensed therapist or a mental health expert. So I'm going to just talk as a layperson who happens to study these dynamics in people. And first of all, some level of anxiety is helpful in our life. It keeps us from like walking on the edge of the Grand Canyon, or, like just doing things that could result in pretty significant harm. So anxiety by itself is actually a tool in our life that can be very, very helpful in the right situations. Now, what we're talking about is anxiety that gets out of control and starts to control our lives. Like, right, it starts to impact our mental health or our physical health, our relational health, and those kind of things. And while it's complicated because it's not one thing that tends to contribute to our anxiety, it's a bunch of things, and it feels like the old whack-a-mole game at the pizza, like Chuck E. Cheese, where you hit one thing and another thing pops up, So I am a believer in counseling and, modern medicine in ways that when we need that help, that it helps. There's also a dynamic of our spiritual life that's involved with that also. But I'm not sure there's a one size fits all. It's probably more recognizing for me personally, if it's recognizing when my heart rate is racing too much, when I can't sleep at night, when I am replaying things in my head over and over again, when I find fear preventing me from doing normal everyday activities or things that I want to do, it's probably more being aware that those things are going on. And really the first thing is saying, I think you might need help with this. And then going to anyone who will listen to you, a friend, an old, another adult or mentor in your life, your provider, for your health care, and just taking those steps. Anxiety is such a broad space that, again, we weren't designed to handle all these things. And it'd be silly to think that we can handle this stuff on our own.
Yeah. Great advice. Just being aware and paying attention. And then I think sometimes our lives are moving so fast that we probably aren't even stopping to pay attention about how, when we're feeling those things, we're just all of a sudden we're like, man, I'm a ball of nerves, or I'm a wreck, or, I feel crazy. And you haven't stopped to kind of figure out why.
There's so much truth to that. And I've been in physical therapy the last couple of years for a pretty significant running injury. And I have been working my way back, and my PT just released me on a running program. And he said, pay attention to your body, pay attention for when it's in pain. I said, oh, yeah, I'm fine. And he said, no, listen to me. These runners are so used to being in pain, it becomes difficult for you to distinguish whether you're in pain. And that pause for a second, because if you're so used to existing in anxiety, it becomes difficult to discern whether or not you're existing in that space.
Wow.
I know.
Yeah, yeah, that's a light bulb, I think. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so relevant. Now, I want to give you an opportunity to encourage listeners, because as we kind of alluded to towards the beginning of our talk, so many people today complain about young adults' problems or weaknesses, but you have studied Gen Z. So what do you see as their strengths?
Oh, this gets me going, because they are, I'm going to start crying probably. They're incredible.
Okay.
They're so incredible. And I think that they get labeled because most older adults don't understand the things that they have overcome and are navigating on a day-to-day basis. So when I think about things that they've experienced that are very foreign to my childhood and my adolescence, like no one had showed up on a campus with a gun ever until I was in college when the first shooting happened. So I'd never experienced that as an adolescent. But my children, right, my personal children have active shooter drills at their school. So this is part of their reality now. Wow. Social media and smartphones didn't exist. And then there was no global pandemic in the middle of my adolescence.
Kind of a big thing.
So I look at all that and I go, man, if you take everything else out and just look at those three things, like, how is this group of people standing? how are they navigating the world? They have this kind of grit and strength that is beyond my comprehension, because I was just trying to make my way through being a teenager. I didn't have to deal with all these other things going on at the same time. And you add that they're more aware of what's happening all the time in the world around them. I definitely was not. And so I look at them and the skills they've developed in how to take in information, how to get up and do their everyday life, and what I appreciate too is they are not watching things and saying, oh, I guess that's how it is, but they're actually a force for change. They're looking at things saying things can be different. So they bring this kind of hope alive that is incredible to watch. And I am really impressed with their how they notice injustice in the world.
Yeah.
And I think that really actually shows a deeper understanding of actually who God is and what sin is, because you don't ask for things to be set right if you think everything's okay. That only comes when you say, it's wrong here. Something is off. Like this needs to be made right. And I think that's a wonderful way that they express the heart of God in this world, is to look around and say something's wrong. It's not how it's supposed to be. So I just really enjoyed the vibrancy they're bringing to our world.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I know that just encourages the heart of so many people listening. And I think it also kind of can help us reframe even this conversation of, instead of looking at it as like a weakness of, oh man, like I need to feel safe. Safety's, a big thing. Older generations didn't worry about that. It's like, no, you're carrying so much burden already, and you're already like focused on so many other issues and things in the world. You need a place of safety to take care of you. And you're not going to find it in the world, but you're going to find it in Jesus, even if it is the opposite of what you would typically think looks like what safety is. You can find that safety and that rest in him.
That's such a good word.
Well, thank you so much for all the wisdom that you're sharing. But I know that you have a book coming out on Gen Z. So tell us a little bit about that, and when we can read that.
It's called What Gen Z Really Wants to Know About God, 7 Questions About Life and Faith. So we're looking at, how has Gen Z experienced the world? How are they viewing the world? What's important to them? And as a result, what kind of questions are they asking about life? And once we know what those questions are and where they're coming from, we can answer those questions with the good news of Jesus Christ, with the gospel and in discipleship. Like, God actually answers all our questions. Isn't that crazy? He actually does address our questions, and the gospel responds to all of our questions. So it's really looking at that framework of saying, how does God respond to the questions that Gen Z is asking? And it is coming out in September 16th, but it's available for pre-order now at Amazon.com.
Great. We will link that, and then maybe we can have you back on whenever it's out and talk about that book more. I'm definitely going to pre-order a copy. So any other resources that you'd like to share for people who are listening and maybe they want to learn more about what we've talked about, or just final words of encouragement?
Oh, wow. There's endless resources on Gen Z. I like to stick with the ones, listen to the voices that bring hope into a generation, right? Listen to the voices that look for the good. There's too many voices that are pounding down on our young people. And I would say our voices matter. The words you speak over people, whether it's your friend, your children, your pet, your neighbors, on social media, the words we speak matter. And so I like to think about, how are we speaking over the people in our lives, and how are we talking about them in a way that allows them to grow into who they're supposed to be in the world, rather than who I don't want them to be in the world.
Yeah, so good. Well, you are definitely one of those voices, bringing so much hope. And thank you for helping us address this question of safety and where we can find that, and just taking time to be on the Know Why podcast today.
Thanks for having me.